To understand the story, one must first understand the world in which it unfolded. It was a world, not of our making, but one we shared with giants and spirits of ice and stone. This was the late Pleistocene epoch, a vast and brutal age of glaciers that gripped the northern continents in a frozen fist, a time scholars would later call the last ice age. The air itself was different, crisp, thin, and carrying a scent of pine, loam, and the distant, metallic tang of ice fields. The sun, a pale and weary coin in a hard blue sky, offered little warmth against the biting winds that swept down from the frozen north. This was a land of profound silence, a deep, resonant quiet, broken only by the groan of shifting glaciers, the sigh of the wind through endless coniferous forests, and the chorus of the creatures that endured there. And what creatures they were! This was a world of megafauna, of animals whose very size defied belief. Shaggy mammoths, their long, curved tusks sweeping the ground, moved in matriarchal herds across the treeless steppes, their footsteps like distant thunder, while rhinoceroses, armored in thick hide and sporting a formidable horn, browsed the tough tundra grasses. Giant elk with antlers spanning 3 meters, cave lions whose robes were thick and whose power was unmatched, and steppe bison, massive and temperamental, all played their parts in the delicate and deadly balance of this ecosystem. In this world of giants, humans were not the undisputed masters they are today. We were survivors, and clever ones at that, but we were fragile. Our tribes were small, bands of perhaps 20 or 30 individuals, bound by blood and shared struggle. We were hunters and gatherers, our lives dictated by the migratory patterns of the herds and the seasonal bounty of berries, roots, and nuts. We wore the furs of the animals we managed to kill, sheltered in caves or in temporary huts of mammoth bone and hide, and huddled around fires that were our greatest weapon against the encroaching dark and cold. Our tools were of stone and bone finely crafted spear points, scrapers. Buren's edge, one a testament to a growing intelligence, a developing capacity to shape our environment. We painted stories of our hunts and our dreams on the walls of sacred caves, our flickering firelight giving life to the images of the beasts we revered and feared. We were a species poised on a knife's edge, our existence a constant negotiation with hunger, predators, and the unforgiving elements. And across the fire, in the shadows just beyond the circle of our light, were the others, the wolves. They were ever present, a part of the landscape as much as the trees and the mountains. To our ancestors, they were both rival and reflection. They were the other great hunters of the continent, organized, intelligent, and supremely adapted to the hunt. We watched them, as they undoubtedly watched us. We saw their social bonds, their complex packs that mirrored our own tribal structures. We saw their coordinated hunts, their strategies that sometimes succeeded where ours failed. We heard their communications, the howls that cut through the night, weaving a complex tapestry of sound that marked territory, assembled the pack, or simply sang to the moon. They were creatures of formidable power and piercing intelligence, and they were everywhere. In the beginning, there was no friendship. There was a wary distance, a respectful fear. We competed for the same prythe, herds of reindeer, the horses, the bison. Sometimes a wolf pack would drive a herd away from our carefully laid ambush. Other times, our thrown spears might steal a kill from a pack that had worked hard to bring it down. It was a relationship of tension, a cold war over the scarce resources of a frozen world. Yet, within this tension, seeds of something extraordinary were sown. The foundations of a partnership that would change the destiny of the planet were laid not in a single moment of dramatic inspiration, but over countless generations of silent observation, of fleeting glances across a snowy plain, of the slow, unconscious recognition of a kindred spirit in the struggle for life. This is the story of how that distance closed. This is the story of the first approach, the first touch, the first bond forged between two species who would, together, conquer the world. The great thaw was not a single event, but a slow, grinding retreat of the ice. Glaciers, like slumbering leviathans, withdrew to their mountain fastnesses, leaving behind a scarred and transformed landscape. In their wake, they deposited vast plains of gravel and silt, carved out deep freshwater lakes that shimmered like blue jewels, and created new river valleys that snaked through the emerging wilderness. The world was becoming warmer, wetter, and more diverse. The mammoth steppe, that vast, cold grassland, began to fragment, giving way to encroaching forests of birch and pine, and later, oak and hazel. This changing world forced adaptation upon all its inhabitants. The mega herbivores, the mammoths, and woolly rhinos, found their realm shrinking, their populations becoming isolated and vulnerable. For the human tribes and the wolf packs, the challenge was the same: to navigate a new ecological puzzle where the old rules no longer consistently applied. Prey animals became more scattered, their migratory routes altered by the new forests and water sources. Survival demanded even greater flexibility, intelligence, and a keen understanding of the altered land. It was during this period of flux that the proximity between human and wolf increased, not by design, but by necessity. Both species were drawn to the same optimal locations: south-facing slopes that caught the sun and were clear of deep snow, sheltered valleys that offered protection from the wind, and most importantly, the abundant hunting grounds around the newly formed lakes and river systems. It became common for a human band to establish a seasonal camp, only to discover that a wolf pack had its denning site a mere few valleys away. This closer coexistence led to a new level of observation. The humans, with their burgeoning symbolic thought, began to see the wolves not just as rivals, but as individuals. They gave them names, not as we do today, but as concepts woven into their stories and campfire talks. The old storytellers would point out the massive grey-furred male who led the pack, calling him Broken Tooth for the distinctive chip in his canine, or the swift tawny female who was always at the forefront of the chase, dubbing her swift sister. They noted the hierarchies, the rituals, the play of the pups, and the care the pack showed for its injured. Most fascinating was the recognition of a shared language of gesture and posture. The humans, whose own communication relied heavily on body language, tone, and expression, began to intuitively understand the wolf's signals. The low, guttural growl of a mother protecting her pups needed no translation. The playful bow, front legs splayed and tail wagging, was an invitation they themselves might mimic in jest with their own children. The raised hackles, the pinned back ears, the submissive roll onto the back, these were all chapters in a non-verbal dialogue that both species could read. The wolves, in turn, grew more accustomed to the human presence. The initial fear of the two-legged creatures and their smoke and fire diminished with constant, non-threatening exposure. They learned the rhythms of the human camp, the times of day when the hunters left and returned, the sounds of celebration after a successful kill, the patterns of the women and children gathering roots and berries along the forest's edge. They discovered that these humans were messy butchers. The areas around human campsites were often littered with discarded bones, scraps of hide, offal, and the heads of animals, a treasure trove of easy calories for a scavenger brave enough to venture close. And so, the first, tentative, non-aggressive interactions began. A young, lean wolf, perhaps one low in the pack's hierarchy and often hungry, would linger at the edge of the clearing after the humans had retired to their shelters for the night. Driven by a hunger that overpowered caution, it would dart in, snatch a discarded reindeer leg bone, still rich with marrow and scraps of meat, and vanish back into the twilight. The next night, it might return, and the next. Other wolves, seeing this success, began to emulate the behavior. The humans, from the darkness of their huts, watched these nightly raids. At first, there was alarm, then amusement. They saw that these wolves were not seeking conflict, they were seeking scraps. A clever hunter might even begin to deliberately toss choice bits a little further from the campfire, curious to see what would happen. It became a silent game, a transaction conducted in the shadows. The wolves provided a service, cleaning the camp of waste that might otherwise attract less desirable predators, like cave hyenas or lions. The humans provided a supplemental, easy meal. This was the fragile, unspoken preamble to a partnership. It was a relationship built, not on confrontation, but on mutual, opportunistic benefit. The distance was closing, inch by inch, night by night. The two most social, cooperative, and intelligent predators on the landscape were slowly learning that the other could be something other than a threat. They were becoming neighbors, and soon, a few extraordinary individuals would take the next, unimaginable step. The spring thaw that year was particularly harsh, unleashing torrential rains that swelled the rivers into raging brown torrents. It was a season of plenty, but also of peril. For the wolf pack, whose territory overlapped with that of the human band, it was a time of both triumph and tragedy. The pack, led by the seasoned alpha male Broken Tooth and his mate, Swift Sister, had successfully brought down a young aurochs near the riverbank. The hunt had been dangerous, the great beast putting up a fierce struggle, but the coordinated effort of the pack had prevailed. Their celebration was short-lived. The rains had softened the earth. As the pack fed, a section of the high riverbank, undermined by the rushing water, collapsed with a sound like a thunderclap. In an instant, chaos, earth, trees, and water crashed down upon them. The wolves scattered, yelping in terror. Most escaped, but the den, dug into the bank and hidden from view, was buried completely. Within it was Swift's sister and her litter of 5 new pups. The pack worked frantically through the night and the next day, digging at the slurry of mud and roots, but the task was hopeless. When they finally broke through, they found only silence and death. The alpha female and 4 of her pups were gone. The pack mourned in their own way, their howls that night a haunting, sorrowful song that echoed across the valley and was heard by the human camp, a sound that stirred a strange empathy in the listeners. But the tragedy was not absolute. By a quirk of fate, 1 pup had survived. He had been pushed by the collapsing earth into a small air pocket near the den's entrance. He was cold, weak, and mewling pitifully when an old, low-ranking female wolf finally dug him out. She tried to care for him, but she had no milk of her own. The pack, reeling from the loss of its alpha female and the disruption of its hierarchy, was in disarray. The pup was neglected, pushed away from the meager meals. He was too young to eat solid food, and he began to fade, a tiny grey-furred bundle of skin and bones, waiting for death. It was a young human girl who found him. Her name was Ella, which in the tongue of her people meant one who sees. She had been foraging for freshwater mussels along the newly configured riverbank, her keen eyes scanning the ground. She saw the evidence of the landslide first, the raw earth, the torn-up trees. Then she heard it, a faint, desperate whimper. Following the sound, she found the pup curled between the roots of a fallen birch tree. He was so weak he could barely lift his head. His eyes, a milky blue of infancy, were half closed. Ella froze. She knew the rules. Wolves were to be respected, feared, left alone. To touch a wolf pup was to invite the wrath of the entire pack. But she also saw what others might not. Not a predator, but an orphan. She saw the protruding ribs, the desperate struggle for life that mirrored the struggle of her own people every day. A deep, instinctual compassion welled up within her, a feeling far older than fear or tribal law. Cautiously, she looked around. The forest was silent. There were no adult wolves in sight. The pack had moved on, making a decision that would change the course of history. Ella knelt. She wrapped the tiny, shivering creature in a soft piece of rabbit skin she carried and tucked him into the basket with her muscles. She said nothing to her kin on the way back to camp, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. That evening, around the central fire, she presented her find to her family. The reaction was immediate and severe. Her father, the band's lead hunter, was furious. "Death follows that creature," he growled. "You have brought the anger of the wolf spirit upon us. Its pack will come for it, and for us, it must be returned or killed." But Ella, usually quiet and obedient, stood her ground. Her grandmother, the tribe's storyteller and keeper of wisdom, placed a withered hand on the hunter's arm. "Wait," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "Look." She pointed a bony finger at the pup, which Ella was now trying to feed drops of broth from a mussel shell. The pup was too weak to lap at it, but its tiny nose twitched at the scent. The old woman's eyes, deep-set and knowing, saw what the hunter's anger blinded him to. "The pack has abandoned this one. The wolf spirit has taken the mother and left the child. Why? Perhaps it is not anger. Perhaps it is a gift, or a test." She turned to Ella. "Can you keep it alive, without bringing danger to the camp?" Ella, her eyes shining with determination, nodded. "I will be its mother." And so, it began. Under the skeptical watch of the entire band, Ella dedicated herself to the pup. She named him Liko, which meant survivor. She mashed meat and bone marrow into a paste, nursing him with her fingers. She kept him warm against her body at night. She played with him using feathers and bits of hide, and he, in turn, followed her everywhere, stumbling on unsteady legs, his tail wagging in a joyful, clumsy rhythm. Liko imprinted on Ella, and, by extension, on the human camp. He did not see humans as rivals. He saw them as his pack. He learned their smells, their sounds, their moods. The tribe, in turn, watched in fascination as the wolf cub grew. Their initial fear turned to curiosity, and then to a peculiar pride. They had never been this close to a wolf before. They saw his intelligence, his loyalty to Ella, his playful nature. He was a living mystery, sharing their fire. As Lyko grew from a mewling pup into a leggy juvenile, his presence ceased to be a novelty and became a part of the daily fabric of the camp. The initial fears of a retaliatory wolf pack attack never materialized. Broken Tooth's pack, after losing their den and their alpha female, had fragmented and moved deeper into the forest, their old territory contested by rivals. Lyko was an island, a wolf of two worlds who truly belonged to neither, yet was bound irrevocably to one. His bond with Ella was the core of his existence. Where she went, he followed. He slept curled at her feet, his warm body a comfort against the cold nights. He learned the meaning of her tone of voice, the sharp call of warning, the gentle coaxing, the playful sing-song she used only with him. He understood her body language, responding to a pointed finger or a change in her posture. In return, Ella became fluent in the language of Lyko. She knew the different meaning behind his whines, the alert intensity of his low woof, the specific wag of his tail that meant he was excited, versus the one that signaled curiosity. This deep cross-species understanding became the foundation for the first, accidental lessons. It started with hunting. Ella would often take Lyko with her when she went to check her snares for rabbits or ptarmigan. Lyko, with his superior nose, would often scent the prey long before Ella saw it. He would freeze, his body tensing, his nose pointed intently towards the trap. At first, Ella thought he was just excited by the smell of a potential meal, but she soon realized he was indicating the location. She began to trust his signal, following his gaze to find a successful catch. One day, a snare had caught a large hare, but it was still alive and struggling. As Ella approached, the hare thrashed violently, breaking free of the weakened sinew and darting into the underbrush. Ella cried out in frustration, but before she could even move, Lyko was a gray streak. His pursuit was silent and efficient. He cornered the injured animal against a fallen log and dispatched it quickly. Then, instead of consuming his prize, he picked it up gently in his mouth, trotted back to Ella, and dropped it at her feet, looking up at her with what could only be described as pride. The significance of this act was not lost on Ella or the others who heard the story. The wolf had not only retrieved the game, but he had given it to the human. This was more than instinct, it was cooperation. It was the application of innate wolf behavior, cooperative hunting and food sharing within the pack directed towards a human. The hunters of the tribe, once so skeptical, now watched Lyko with new, calculating eyes. They began to take him on their short, exploratory hunts for smaller game. They saw how his hearing could detect the rustle of a boar in a thicket long before their own ears could. They saw how his nose could wind a deer from hundreds of paces away. He would stop, his head cocked, his body rigid, and the hunters learned to freeze with him, reading his signals as a map to unseen prey. Lyko also became an unparalleled early warning system. The human senses, dulled by the constant smoke and chatter of the camp, were no match for his. He could hear the approach of a bear long before the sentries could see it. He could smell the strange, unfamiliar scent of a human from another tribe drifting on the wind. His low growl, a vibration felt more than heard, would alert the camp to danger, giving them precious time to prepare, to grab spears, to protect the children. The camp began to feel safer with Lyko there. He was their living, breathing guardian of the perimeter. He was also a source of warmth and comfort on cold nights, and an endless source of amusement for the children with his playful antics. He was no longer a wolf living among humans. He was Lyko, a member of the tribe. The most profound lesson, however, was one of emotional connection. The people saw the depth of Lyko's attachment to Ella. They saw his joy when she returned from an absence, his concern when she was sad, his protective stance when a stranger approached her. It forced them to reconsider the inner world of the wolf. These were not unfeeling, savage beasts. They were creatures of loyalty, emotion, and deep social bonds. They were, in ways that were both mysterious and beautiful, like us. The success of Lyko's integration did not go unnoticed by other bands. Visitors from neighboring tribes would come to trade and would stare in disbelief at the young wolf that lounged by the fire, that played with the children, that followed the hunters. They carried the story back with them, a fantastic tale of the people who lived with a wolf. The idea, once unthinkable, was now seeded in the human imagination. It was possible. Lyko eventually reached maturity and, driven by instincts he could not ignore, he would sometimes disappear for days at a time. The tribe feared he had left for good, but he always returned, a little wilder, a little more scent-marked by the forest, but always returning to Ella, to his human pack. On one of these journeys, he encountered a young, dispersing female wolf from another pack. She was wary of humans, but she was drawn to Lyko. Cautiously, he led her to the outskirts of the human camp. The test was on. Could this miracle be repeated? Could the bond extend beyond a single hand-raised orphan? The tribe held its breath. The next chapter of the story was about to begin, not with a single wolf, but with a pair. The arrival of the female wolf, whom the children named Naira Quiet Wind, marked a pivotal turn from a fascinating anomaly to a potential tradition. She was everything Lyko was not: skittish, fiercely independent, and deeply suspicious of the two-legged creatures. For weeks, she would not come closer than a stone's throw from the camp's edge, melting back into the forest if anyone approached. She was a shadow at the periphery, a pair of glowing eyes in the dusk. Lyko became the bridge. He would spend time with Naira in the woods, then return to the comfort of the camp in Ella. He was a living ambassador, demonstrating through his own relaxed demeanor that these humans were not a threat. The tribe, guided by the old grandmother's wisdom, adopted a policy of passive invitation. They deliberately left out larger portions of futha head and entrails of a red deer, the less desirable parts of a boar, placing them at a consistent spot on the camp's border. Hunger eventually overcame fear. Naira began to take the food, always under the cover of darkness. The people pretended not to notice, but they always knew, and they took quiet satisfaction in the gradually diminishing distance of her approach. It was a courtship, a slow, patient seduction of trust. The true breakthrough came during the great hunt for the aurochs. The tribe's hunters had tracked a small herd of the massive, formidable beasts to a high meadow. It was a dangerous endeavor. Aurochs were notoriously aggressive and could easily gore a man to death. The success of the hunt was critical. The meat and hide would see the tribe through the coming winter. The plan was a classic ambush. The hunters hid downwind in the tall grass at the edge of the meadow, waiting for the herd to drift within range of their spears. But the wind shifted unpredictably. A young bull caught their scent, let out a deep, alarmed bellow, and the entire herd stampeded directly away from the ambush site. The hunt was failing before it had begun. In that moment of frustration and desperation, something incredible happened. Lyko, who had followed the hunters, let out a low, rumbling growl. Naira, who had been shadowing the party from a distance, echoed it. Then, acting on an ancient, ingrained instinct, they did not charge the massive beasts. Instead, they began to run in a wide, arcing, flanking maneuver, just as a wild pack would do. Their synchronized movement was a breathtaking display of innate strategy. They harried the edges of the stampeding herd, not attacking, but applying pressure. They nipped at the heels of a young cow, not to bring it down, but to turn it. Their barks and snarls created a wall of sound and menace. Through their coordinated effort, they began to peel one animal away from the safety of the herd, isolating it, driving it not towards the forest, but back towards the meadowland, towards the waiting hunters. The hunters, watching this unfold, were stunned into momentary inaction. Then, their own instincts took over. Seeing the aurochs being turned, they rose from their hiding places, shouting and waving their spears, adding their own pressure to the wolves' efforts. The isolated animal, confused and panicked, was now perfectly channeled. It was a partnership, a seamless, unplanned collaboration between human and wolf. The spears flew true. The great beast fell. The success of the hunt was owed not to human planning alone, nor to wolf power alone, but to the fusion of both. That night, there was a feast unlike any other. The tribe celebrated not just the mountain of meat that would feed them, but the new hunters who had made it possible. For the first time, Naira did not wait for scraps to be left at the border. Tentatively, encouraged by Lyko's confident presence, she entered the circle of firelight. The tribe, in a gesture of profound acceptance, threw her the aurochs' own heart. She took it and lay down beside Lyko to eat, her eyes watchful but no longer afraid. She had joined the hunt. She had joined the pack. This event changed everything. The wolves were no longer just guardians or companions. They were hunting partners. Their value was now quantifiable, tangible. They increased the success rate of hunts dramatically, reduced the danger to the human hunters by doing the dangerous work of harrying and isolating prey, and could track wounded game over distances that would baffle a human. The tribe began to consciously encourage this. They selectively fed the wolves that showed the most use and the most loyalty. They encouraged the breeding of Lyko and Naira. The pups from their first litter were born within the sound of the human camp. They were socialized with humans from their first breath. They were the first true generation of animals that were not tamed wild wolves, but born into a human-wolf partnership. These pups were different. They were more attuned to human commands, more biddable, while still retaining their wolfish instincts for the hunt. The tribe began to shape them, unconsciously initiating a process of selective breeding. The less aggressive, more cooperative, more human-tolerant animals were favored, fed better, and allowed to breed. The sharper, more unpredictable ones were driven away. The wolf was slowly, generation by generation, being sculpted into the dog. The partnership was also reflected in the spirit world. The wolf became a powerful totem, a symbol of loyalty, guidance, and successful hunting. Stories and rituals grew around them. Howling, once a sound that brought fear, now became a song of the tribe. On clear nights, the people would howl with their wolves, their voices mingling in an eerie, beautiful chorus that proclaimed their unity and their strength to the world. They were no longer just a human tribe. They were the people of the wolf. The arrival of the female wolf, whom the children named Naira Quiet Wind, marked a pivotal turn from a fascinating anomaly to a potential tradition. She was everything Lyko was not: skittish, fiercely independent, and deeply suspicious of the two-legged creatures. For weeks, she would not come closer than a stone's throw from the camp's edge, melting back into the forest if anyone approached. She was a shadow at the periphery, a pair of glowing eyes in the dusk. Lyko became the bridge. He would spend time with Naira in the woods, then return to the comfort of the camp in Ella. He was a living ambassador, demonstrating through his own relaxed demeanor that these humans were not a threat. The tribe, guided by the old grandmother's wisdom, adopted a policy of passive invitation. They deliberately left out larger portions of futha head and entrails of a red deer, the less desirable parts of a boar, placing them at a consistent spot on the camp's border. Hunger eventually overcame fear. Naira began to take the food, always under the cover of darkness. The people pretended not to notice, but they always knew, and they took quiet satisfaction in the gradually diminishing distance of her approach. It was a courtship, a slow, patient seduction of trust. The true breakthrough came during the great hunt for the aurochs. The tribe's hunters had tracked a small herd of the massive, formidable beasts to a high meadow. It was a dangerous endeavor. Aurochs were notoriously aggressive and could easily gore a man to death. The success of the hunt was critical. The meat and hide would see the tribe through the coming winter. The plan was a classic ambush. The hunters hid downwind in the tall grass at the edge of the meadow, waiting for the herd to drift within range of their spears. But the wind shifted unpredictably. A young bull caught their scent, let out a deep, alarmed bellow, and the entire herd stampeded directly away from the ambush site. The hunt was failing before it had begun. In that moment of frustration and desperation, something incredible happened. Lyko, who had followed the hunters, let out a low, rumbling growl. Naira, who had been shadowing the party from a distance, echoed it. Then, acting on an ancient, ingrained instinct, they did not charge the massive beasts. Instead, they began to run in a wide, arcing flanking maneuver, just as a wild pack would do. Their synchronized movement was a breathtaking display of innate strategy. They harried the edges of the stampeding herd, not attacking, but applying pressure. They nipped at the heels of a young cow, not to bring it down, but to turn it. Their barks and snarls created a wall of sound and menace. Through their coordinated effort, they began to peel one animal away from the safety of the herd, isolating it, driving it not towards the forest, but back towards the meadow and towards the waiting hunters. The hunters, watching this unfold, were stunned into momentary inaction. Then, their own instincts took over. Seeing the aurochs being turned, they rose from their hiding places, shouting and waving their spears, adding their own pressure to the wolves' efforts. The isolated animal, confused and panicked, was now perfectly channeled. It was a partnership, a seamless, unplanned collaboration between human and wolf. The spears flew true. The great beast fell. The success of the hunt was owed not to human planning alone, nor to wolf power alone, but to the fusion of both. That night, there was a feast unlike any other. The tribe celebrated not just the mountain of meat that would feed them, but the new hunters who had made it possible. For the first time, Naira did not wait for scraps to be left at the border. Tentatively, encouraged by Liko's confident presence, she entered the circle of firelight. The tribe, in a gesture of profound acceptance, threw her the oryx's own heart. She took it and lay down beside Liko to eat, her eyes watchful but no longer afraid. She had joined the hunt. She had joined the pack. This event changed everything. The wolves were no longer just guardians or companions, they were hunting partners. Their value was now quantifiable, tangible. They increased the success rate of hunts dramatically, reduced the danger to the human hunters by doing the dangerous work of harrying and isolating prey, and could track wounded game over distances that would baffle a human. The tribe began to consciously encourage this. They selectively fed the wolves that showed the most use and the most loyalty. They encouraged the breeding of Liko and Naira. The pups from their first litter were born within the sound of the human camp. They were socialized with humans from their first breath. They were the first true generation of animals that were not tamed wild wolves, but born into a human-wolf partnership. These pups were different. They were more attuned to human commands, more biddable, while still retaining their wolfish instincts for the hunt. The tribe began to shape them, unconsciously initiating a process of selective breeding. The less aggressive, more cooperative, more human-tolerant animals were favored, fed better, and allowed to breed. The sharper, more unpredictable ones were driven away. The wolf was slowly, generation by generation, being sculpted into the dog. The partnership was also reflected in the spirit world. The wolf became a powerful totem, a symbol of loyalty, guidance, and successful hunting. Stories and rituals grew around them. Howling, once a sound that brought fear, now became a song of the tribe. On clear nights, the people would howl with their wolves, their voices mingling in an eerie, beautiful chorus that proclaimed their unity and their strength to the world. They were no longer just a human tribe. They were the people of the wolf. The symbiotic relationship, once a fragile thread connecting to species, had now become a strong, unbreakable bond, woven into the very fabric of daily life for the people of the wolf. The benefits were so profound, so transformative, that it became impossible to imagine a existence without the canine companions. The tribe flourished. Their winter stores were fuller, their children safer, and their understanding of the world around them deepened through the senses of their four-legged allies. This prosperity created a surplus of time, a luxury their ancestors had never known. No longer was every waking moment consumed by the immediate, desperate struggle for food and safety. This surplus energy was channeled into innovation. The hunters, now working in effortless tandem with the wolves, had more opportunities to observe, to experiment, to refine. They began to develop new technologies, specifically designed to leverage their partnership. The most significant was the refinement of the spear thrower, or haute l'étale. This simple lever device allowed a hunter to launch a spear with far greater force and accuracy over a longer distance. Now, a hunter could stand at a safer range while the dogs harried and held a large beast at bay, and deliver a killing blow with devastating power. The success rate for hunting massive, dangerous game like aurochs and bison increased exponentially, further cementing the dog's value. But innovation was not limited to weapons. The tribe's artisans, inspired by the strength and endurance of their companions, began to experiment with harnessing that power. It started with a simple travois, two long poles lashed together with a hide net stretched between them, attached to a dog's shoulders. The women, who were responsible for the grueling work of breaking camp and moving belongings, were the first to truly appreciate this revolution. They could now load hides, tent frames, and baskets of food onto the travois, and the dogs would pull them effortlessly. The entire tribe could travel farther, faster, and with less exhaustion, following migratory herds with an efficiency that allowed them to exploit territories previously thought too distant or inhospitable. This mobility was a key advantage. It allowed the tribe to follow seasonal resources with precision, avoid areas of conflict or disease, and explore new lands. The world, for the people of the wolf, was expanding. Their horizons were no longer limited by the distance a human could walk while carrying a heavy load. They were limited only by the endurance of their dogs. The roles of the dogs diversified within the social structure of the camp itself. Beyond hunting and hauling, they became integral to shepherding. As the tribe began to practice a form of early pastoralism, keeping small, managed herds of goats and reindeer for milk and blood, the dogs found a new purpose. Their innate predatory instincts were redirected and honed. They learned to circle the herds, to keep them together, to ward off predators, and to respond to the whistles and calls of the herders. A well-trained dog could do the work of 3 humans, allowing a single family to manage a sizable herd. This deep integration fostered an even greater emotional intimacy. The dogs were not just tools. They were family members with names, personalities, and roles. They slept in the shelters, sharing body heat during frigid nights. They were the first to greet returning hunters, their joyful barks and wagging tails, a celebration of a successful hunt. They were gentle guardians of the children, tolerating the clumsy pulls and hugs of toddlers. The people began to attribute to them human-like qualities of loyalty, bravery, and even humor. They were confidants, silent listeners to the troubles and joys of their human partners. This bond was most profoundly expressed in death. The first time a beloved hunting dog died of old age, the tribe did not simply discard the body. They treated it with respect, akin to that of a human tribesman. They buried the dog in a shallow grave, placing beside it a choice piece of meat for its journey to the spirit world, its favorite toy, and sometimes even a flint tool. The old grandmother, her voice thick with emotion, would tell stories of the dog's great hunts and its faithfulness. It was a recognition that a non-human soul had departed, leaving a void in the pack. This ritual was a testament to the depth of the bond. The line between human and animal had become beautifully, respectfully blurred. The phenomenon of the human-dog partnership was too powerful to remain contained. The original tribe, the first pioneers of this bond, had become a nexus of a new way of life. Their prosperity and unique advantage did not go unnoticed by the scattered bands of humans who occasionally crossed their path or met them at traditional seasonal gathering places. Traders from distant tribes, arriving to barter for fine flint or exotic shells, would stare in disbelief at the scene before them. They saw hunters setting out with a pack of wolves trotting obediently at their heels. They saw children leading small herds of reindeer, guided not by sticks, but by the silent, efficient movements of a single dog. They saw the travois piled high with goods being pulled effortlessly by these powerful animals. The stories they had heard were not exaggerations. They were understatements. This was magic made real. The demand for these tamed spirits of the hunt became immense. Other tribes, facing harsher climates, fiercer competition, or simply seeking the same prosperity, desperately wanted this advantage for themselves. The people of the wolf found themselves in a position of unprecedented influence. They possessed the ultimate commodity. A sophisticated and careful system of trade developed. The tribe's wisest elders and best breeders took charge. They would not trade the core of their own pack, the direct descendants of Lyko and Naira, who were the heart of their hunting success. Instead, they selectively bred their dogs, and from each litter, they would choose the pups that showed the most promise: intelligence, a calm demeanor, a strong build, but also those they could spare. These chosen pups became highly sought-after trade items, worth more than the finest flint knife or the softest otter pelt. They were exchanged for resources the tribe lacked: rare pigments for cave paintings, obsidian from distant volcanoes, sturdy wood for spear shafts, and promises of alliance. The trade was more than an exchange of goods. It was a transfer of knowledge. With each pup went basic instructions how to feed it, how to socialize it, the sounds and gestures it understood. The receiving tribe was not just buying an animal, they were buying a membership into a new world order. And so, the seeds of the partnership were scattered to the 4 winds. Pups were carried in baskets on long, arduous journeys north into the vast, frozen tundras where the sun barely rose in winter. There, they found a new purpose with tribes who hunted mammoth and reindeer. In the harsh Arctic, their strength and thick coats made them indispensable, not just for hunting, but for survival itself. They evolved into powerful, thick-furred dogs, whose descendants would one day pull sleds across thousands of miles of ice. Other pups went west, into the deep, deciduous forests of Europe. There, they adapted to hunting boar and red deer in dense undergrowth, their bodies becoming stockier, their senses even more acute to navigate the tangled world of sight and sound. They went south, along coastlines and into warmer climates, their coats growing shorter, their frames becoming more agile for chasing fleet-footed game on open plains. In every new environment, the proto-dogs adapted. Human preference and natural selection worked in a powerful duet. The process of domestication accelerated. Traits that were desirable to humans were selectively encouraged. Tameness, cooperation, specific hunting styles, and a variety of physical attributes suited to specialized tasks. The sharp, independent fearfulness of the wolf was gradually bred out, replaced by a biddable, human-focused dependence. The animals became more juvenile in their behavior throughout their lives, a biological phenomenon known as neoteny, which enhanced their ability to bond with humans. Their very DNA was being reshaped by the partnership. The howl of the wolf, once a universal symbol of the wild and the unknown, now had a counterpart, the bark of the dog, a sound that signified the presence of humanity. The world was being filled with a new creature, one that was neither wolf nor human, but a living testament to the bond between them. The great dispersal had begun, and there would be no turning back. Millennia flowed like a river, carving the landscape of time. The great ice sheets had retreated, leaving behind the world we would recognize today. The mighty mammoths and woolly rhinos were gone, fading into legend and bone. Human societies had transformed beyond recognition. They had built villages, then towns. They had learned to sow seeds and domesticate other animals, goats, sheep, cattle, pigs. They had entered the age of agriculture, and with it, a new, settled way of life. Through all this radical change, one constant remained. The dog. It did not just survive this transition. It evolved alongside humanity, seamlessly integrating into every new chapter of the human story. In the agricultural villages that sprouted along river valleys, the dog's role shifted once again. It became a guardian of fixed territory, patrolling the perimeter of fields and settlements, barking a warning at the approach of strangers or predators that threatened the stored grain or the domesticated herds. The livestock guardian dog was born a large, powerful, and fiercely loyal animal whose instinct to protect its pack was now extended to helpless sheep and goats. The dog's value as a companion deepened in these settled communities. No longer just a partner in the nomadic struggle for survival, it became a fixture of home and hearth. It was a playmate for children growing up in one place, a comfort to the elderly, a loyal friend to the farmer tending his fields. The bond became less about utility and more about pure, unwavering companionship. Dogs were celebrated in art, in pottery, in the stories told around the fire. They had earned a permanent place in the human heart and home. The selective breeding that began unconsciously around the fires of the first tribe became deliberate and sophisticated. Humans began to shape dogs with intention. They bred shepherds for intelligence and herding instinct, mastiffs for power and guarding, sighthounds for breathtaking speed, and scent hounds for unrivaled tracking ability. The single, generalized wolf form diverged into a breathtaking tapestry of shapes, sizes, and talons, a living monument to human ingenuity and the incredible plasticity of the canine form. The legacy of that first act of compassion by a young girl named Ella echoed through the centuries. The wolf had given humanity the ultimate gift, a partnership that provided a critical advantage in a dangerous world. It offered its keen senses, its strength, its instinctual wisdom, and its absolute loyalty. In return, humanity offered the wolf a new evolutionary path. It gave it a place by the fire, a guaranteed meal, protection from the harshness of wild existence, and a purpose intertwined with our own. The wolf traded the freedom of the wild for the security of the bond, and in doing so, its descendants inherited the earth alongside humanity. The story of the first humans who tamed wolves is not a story of domination or conquest. It is a story of mutual recognition. It is the story of two apex predators who, instead of destroying each other, chose to collaborate. They saw in each other a kindred spirit, social, intelligent, cooperative, and family-oriented. They closed the distance, not with weapons, but with curiosity and, ultimately, with trust. That trust changed the destiny of both species. It allowed humanity to flourish, to expand, to create. It gave us the first true technology of partnership, a template we would later use with other animals. For the wolf, it created the dog, a creature that found its purpose in the gaze of its human companion. The unbreakable bond was forged in the cold of the Ice Age, tempered by mutual need, and strengthened over thousands of years of shared history. It is a bond written not in stone or in books, but in the very DNA of hundreds of millions of dogs who, to this day, look to humans with unwavering faith, a silent echo of that first moment of connection between a girl and a pup, an echo that will endure for as long as both species exist.